Welcome, everybody. So glad you're here as part of this amazing Reclaiming Our Spiritual Heritage Week virtual conference. It is my honor, my privilege, my delight to share with you today a friend, Richard Blanco, who for many of you will not need an introduction. He is the first immigrant, the first Latino, and the first gay person to have been chosen as inaugural poet. In your case, Richard, it was for Obama's second inauguration, for his second administration. Welcome. Thanks so much for spending time with us.
Thank you. Thank you for putting all this together.
And first of all, let's start there. How was that for you? I was recently, rewatching that on YouTube. And I can only imagine the feelings going through you in that moment.
Yeah, it was a very complex set of emotions, to say the least, but it was actually a very moving, and I wasn't as nervous as people would think, because it was kind of such a sacred, reverent space. It's palpable. Every American should go to an inauguration. Granted, I had a great seat, but but it was the first time I actually, between the rush of I got the call on December 12th, and on January 21st, I'm sitting in front of 1 million people. But it was the first time that I was actually sat quietly and realized what was happening. And in a great way, my mother was next to me, thinking about her growing up in a dirt floor home in Cuba, and us too now, all the sacrifices she made for her boys, for her 2 sons, and also her insistence on education, and sitting, steps away from the president of the United States. So, you feel like you're in service to something much bigger than yourself, and that takes the edge off. It really feels like there's something, it's no longer about you or your poem or trying to look good or whatnot. It's really about being of service. Even, it's not even about Beyonce, who was saying the national anthem during that inauguration.
Right.
It was in everybody.
I mean, congratulations, man. What an honor. Do you know how they got to you? How your name became known to them?
No, it's still somewhat of a secret. I've had opportunities to ask the president, but I just haven't. I think he probably wouldn't tell me all the details, but I prefer also my romantic version of them. He and Michelle sort of reading my poems in bed and thinking, honey, we should get him for the inauguration, or him reading my poems in the Oval Office and canceling his meetings for the day because he's so moved by my poems. But I imagine it must have been something a little more sort of bureaucratic. Perhaps maybe they handed him, a couple or a handful of poets. I know he chose me personally, and I know that he chose the poem personally, because they asked me to write 3 poems actually, and I know that he picked the one that obviously that I read.
I didn't realize your mom had been sitting there next to you. What a beautiful experience for both of you. And you and I shared kind of similar family experiences. Your mom was 7 months pregnant when she left Cuba. Mine was 8 months pregnant. Our families both emigrated through Spain before we came to the US, and eventually settled in Miami. And you actually went to high school with some of my younger siblings.
Yep.
And you've been to the family house years ago.
Yeah. There's as I'd like to say, I was made in Cuba, assembled in Spain, and imported to the United States. So yeah, I don't know about you, but we left 45 days after I was born. So my green card photo is actually my newborn photo. It's really sort of started me on the journey of questioning home, and in a sort of, obviously not in a conscious way, but in sort of started imprinting in me those questions that would come up when I started writing in my late 20s about home, place, identity, and whatnot. And yes, I remember. How many of you are there? I remember there's a lot of siblings.
Nine of us, 8 now, but there were 9 of us then when you used to come by.
Yeah, and your brother Alberto or Alba was in my grade. Had many wonderful after school. It was always great for me to watch, because I only have one brother, and my all my family back then on my mother's side was in Cuba, so I grew up in a very small family, and I only had one uncle here, and he only had one daughter. I was like, 9 kids. I was like, it's crazy. I
Yeah.
loved it.
Yeah, it was great. And we're still really tight, all of us. We're all close in age. There's only 12 years from the youngest to the oldest. So I
Yeah, that's
feel
pretty good.
very blessed about my family. Um, are you back in Miami full time, or you still have a place up in Maine?
I still have a place in Maine. That's where I'm now for the summer. I took a job, well, a professorship at FIU at my alma mater in 2019, just in time for the pandemic. So then I ended up teaching a year and a half back here up in my forest in Maine. But it's nice to be back in Miami, at least part of the year. It's nice not to be there in the summer.
Seriously,
You know,
seriously.
I've like I said, I've ran away from. I keep on running away from Miami and coming back to it. There's something just where my whole being is somehow connected to that place, and especially the beach and
Yeah,
the whole
yeah.
landscape is so much part of my life and my spiritual health in a way. To nature is something I connect to a lot, both here in Maine, but in a different way, mountains and pine trees, but that's Miami will always be a part of. I always say it's my home city, not my hometown, but my home city now.
Yeah, no, I agree. After 20 years in California, I never thought I'd come back, but it does have that pull, and of course, family being here, that is part of the pull.
Yeah,
Um, but there's more than that too. Um, Last year, you were appointed as inaugural poet laureate by Miami-Dade County Mayor Levine Cava. How was that?
it's been great. Part of growing up in a working class, as a working class immigrant kid, didn't have a lot of access to the humanities, and especially, the grade school that we went through. Or did you go to St. Brendan as well, or no?
No, I went to Beleng.
Yeah. So no, but I mean elementary school. Oh yeah, elementary school. Well, it was a poor parish. We didn't have a lot of, we didn't have art or music. I think we had it once a month. So anyway, I always grew up craving more of that. And so now as an adult, and actually as having served as a presidential inaugural poet, which is such a public moment for poetry and for a poet. Part of my self-imposed mission has been to sort of give back in a way, make sure
Mm-hmm.
that kids can connect with poetry, that people at large can connect with poetry in a way that I wasn't able to. So part of that role as poet laureate, I get to do that. And we have a wonderful project called Miami's Favorite Poems Project, which people are invited to share their favorite poem. And the backstory of how that poem sort of changed their life. And we have an archive. You can go to miamidade.gov/poetry and upload your poem and your story. And then we're having community events. We just had one at the Pinecrest Library. When it's just wonderful to hear, a lot of people say, oh, I don't really get poetry. I don't really read poetry. But if you ask them if they have a favorite poem, 9 times out of 10, they have a favorite poem that somehow moved their life, and continues to do so. And it's wonderful to hear that story. And even as poets, not necessarily reading our own work, but sharing our love for poetry in a different way. So yeah, I get to do that. And also as education ambassador for the Academy of American Poets, I visit a lot with teachers and try to work with them and sharing our resources, innovative and creative ways to teach poetry, to connect poetry and the rich life-saving power at times of poetry with students.
Mm. You actually studied civil engineering, I imagine, to reassure your family. When did you know poetry was your thing?
I'm still not sure, but uh, my decision, it's interesting because I think people sort of tend to think that the narrative goes something like, oh, I was forced to study engineering and then I discovered poetry and the clouds parted and the cherubs came down and I was happily ever after. I thought that was what would happen. But like anything in life, it's work and it has its moments of joy and moments of and low moments too. But but yeah, growing up again, getting back to the immigrant sort of working class family and lack of, really, not that my parents denied me a career or studies in the humanities, but it just wasn't in the realm of, we weren't around the dinner table talking about Picasso or whatnot. Plus, what little they did know about arts and whatnot was Cuban. So, which was a layer of separation, right? A degree of separation. My parents don't know who Robert Frost is, for example,
Mhm.
um, or for that matter, Bruce Springsteen. I'm trying to explain to my mother who Bruce Springsteen is. We just met at the inaugural at the Humanities Medal Awards. But I was great at math. I was always like this left brain, right brain kid. I was one of those obnoxious kids, students that got like pretty much A's in everything. um, and so I studied engineering because, again, it was also influenced by, I had to pick something that I could make a living in. I mean, I didn't have the luxury of the arts. Again, why I give back, because it's also like, well, you may not study poetry, but you can still like connect with it and enrich your life. So yeah, that's the way it went. And then I ironically, it was in engineering that I discovered poetry. When I get to my consulting job, my consulting office, half of my job is writing reports and studies and letters, and then proposals, which are really just a narrative of your vision for a project or whatnot. It's all words. And I started falling in love with language, or
Hmm.
geeking out on language, and became the go-to person for writing and at the firm. And if you write a great proposal and get $40 million job, you get the promotion, right? So anyway, I realized the importance of language. But more recently, I realized I was still questioning why poetry, right? Like there's so many
Hmm.
arts or different things. I always wanted to be an architect, and I tried that. I went to master's program in that and realized I was horrible at it. But as I did recently, I realized that, again, at a very early age, um, I don't remember ever not knowing two languages. I know I
Hmm.
probably had a first language, which was Spanish, but it was really close. So by the time I was 3, 4, 5 years old, I was already translating for my parents. I mean,
Hmm.
not whole conversations, but how do you how do you call this, or what does this phrase mean? So I think at an early age, I just realized that language wasn't just a form of communication, that I didn't take it for granted, but that was a way of thinking and breathing and being in the world. And also that language was power. I mean, imagine you're 5 years old and
Hmm.
you know something your parents don't know. So I think when it came time to do something creative, when the right brain said, hey, we're going to do something creative, I think it naturally came back to language.
I left Cuba a little bit older than you were. I was 10. So one of the things for which I'm really grateful for that experience is that, we had a TV, but there was nothing worth watching. So we grew up reading. So for me, it makes more sense that I fell in love with words because of that. That's how I grew up, and we invented our own games and all that.
Right.
Help us understand how you went from writing proposals, civil engineering proposals, to falling in love with words and poetry specifically.
Well, I mean, I wish I had like this great, that I had planned all this, but it's like so many things in life, you just kind of explore. I was just following my creative and intellectual curiosities, and I just thought, okay, this is interesting. I like writing. What do I know? Nothing about poetry. Let's do that. So I just signed up for what was back then Miami-Dade Community College, and just signed up for a workshop. And I was writing really horrible poems at the beginning because my sense of poetry was so archaic, and I was writing, like an old British white guy, about daffodils in Miami where there are no daffodils. Um, and so I started learning rather quickly because I was like 27 at the time. So your learning curve is a little bit faster. And then one poem led to another and another. Took another class at Miami-Dade. I applied to FIU's MFA and Master of Fine Arts in Creative Writing. I was rejected the first time around, but they saw some potential. So they allowed me to take a graduate course and then reapply the following year. And that was just really, really sort of opened the floodgates of my love for poetry, because I was studying it with people that were, real poets, in the world. And so I'll never forget, my first assignment was with Professor Campbell McGrath. My first assignment was we read some poems by Whitman and Frost and Ginsberg, and my first assignment was write a poem about America, and that opened up this whole all these questions that I didn't know I had about my identity, about my cultural identity, about my place in this country, the work that I'm still working on. And in a way, when President Obama asked me to write a poem, it was kind of the same assignment. I was like, yeah, I've been working on that for 25 years on that very assignment, that very theme. But yeah, it was just as they say in Spanish, poquito a poco. It was just little by little. And I always tell my students, there is some kind of romantic sense about the arts in general, but in many ways, yes, there's dimensions of it that are, a little bit harder to sort of pinpoint or formalize. But in essence, it's just like anything, any endeavor in life. You step in, you start learning, you practice, you fail, you succeed, you fail again, you practice some more, you show up, you stay in the game, and someday the White House calls. You do the work. Just like a sports star, or a great dancer, or a great engineer, or a great doctor. Always challenging yourself to be better and better, and always keep on learning. But poquito a poco, yeah.
Poquito a poco. Did you have any? I mean, could you possibly have imagined back then when you were just getting into poetry what was to come?
No, I mean, I really actually, I should have said that I never quit my full-time job as an engineer. I think for practical reasons. Obviously, I was had to support myself, but I was for most of my writing career, I was engineer by day and poet by night. So I'm still a night owl writer. But when I went in, I and I think there's something to that when you remain sort of pure spirit in some kind of endeavor, and you're not doing it just for something big to happen. Although, of course, you want something big to happen. But I was just doing it because I was, number one, I was learning, I was having fun, I was enjoying the art. I was like, it was just something. It was like a pleasure I had never had or had given, or it was a pleasure I gave myself, a privilege or a luxury that I gave myself, was just to be in the art and not worry about, making a living at it or a career at it. I mean, of course, that came later, or I should say it comes in cycles. Sometimes you start, sometimes you're just about the work, and then sometimes you have to, like right now I'm getting a new book published and having to deal with the flap copy and the blurbs and that stuff, and then worried about, is it good enough, and that kind of stuff. But yeah, I don't really plan for these things to happen. I sort of, every 3 years or so, I sort of have like my own sort of retreat, so to speak. I'll take like 2 days and just focus on my life and maybe write down some goals, some wishes and aspirations, and just sort of set that out there, and then I put that away and don't check in until 3 years later. And surprisingly, a lot of those things, of course, something like Lily Tomlin said, I think she said she asked God to be that she asked God to be famous. She said, and I should have been more specific. But sometimes I'll say, like, I'll try to be more general, not like win the Pulitzer Prize, but like, have a really nationally recognized accolade, like whatever that is. And then, the latest surprise, of course, was getting receiving the National Humanities Medal from President Biden and the NEH, which was like, how did that happen? But it was really interesting, because I was like, you know what, like, I'm feeling like something's got to happen right now. I don't know what that is, but
That's amazing, man. What an accomplishment! So many accomplishments. one of the things that I wanted to ask you about, because I noticed both in your inaugural poem for Obama, One Today, and your Miami-Dade Poet Laureate poem, there, there was this theme of oneness, of highlighting the commonalities between us rather than the difference. Has that always been something you thought about?
Um, yes, I think in some ways, in a roundabout way, and I think it comes from, in part, from writing about cultural identity and about Cuba, right? And so trying to connect what is the emotional common ground that poetry can speak to, and especially when it comes to things of Cuba, which can be so, as are still so highly politicized and polarized. I purposely thought about how the art can work towards, again, on an emotional level, or I like to call myself an emotional historian as a poet, to just connect and narrate those stories, and how, whether you're in Cuba, whether you're for going to Cuba or whatever, to just take the politics out of it and realize our common ground, our common joys, our common sorrows and whatnot. So I think that's always stayed with me. And I guess I like to create poetry that lifts us up. Not, I mean, sometimes, even in poems about tragedies or poems about social political issues, I just feel the writer's job or the artist's job is to, again, lift us up or show us a way out of the darkness, or a possibility out of the darkness, rather than stay in the same sort of energy of, polarization and debate. But I think that's what art does best. I think that's what, where it can really, the rhetoric can really change. And part of it is that art presents real lives, right? It attaches real lives with real names and real faces to issues that are sometimes just abstracted politically or whatnot. And so I think, by presenting the poem as a witness, that has a deep power. But yeah, I think in some ways that's always been with me. To put it more succinctly, like Michael Jackson, I'm a lover, not a fighter. Right.
Yeah.
So, or more flies, you attract more flies with honey than vinegar. But yeah, I'm that poet. I'm like, let's connect here.
I don't know about you, but I don't feel fully Cuban. I don't feel fully American. Do you do you relate to that, and do you think that's part of what allows you to see beyond those more superficial differences, and allows you to connect with a more universal um, connection, expression?
Yeah, I think, and even being bilingual is also part of, always, you can see the world in two ways, right? And you understand the nuances and the differences and yet the commonalities. Yeah, I think even going back into like thinking about, how everything about Cuba was different at school than it was at home, or it was different at home than it was in the real public arena, and understanding that the truth is in the gray in some ways. That, also, I think, partly identifying with my parents' sense of loss and longing, which is in a way mine, as well. It's inherited trauma in some ways. Also made me understand, humanity in a different way, humans in a different way, and understanding that there's something deeper than a political issue. It's more like there's real pain and real trauma here, and there's real anger, and how does that manifest itself in my own family and also in the community at large. And yeah, I think I've taken that and applied it to other sort of experiences in my life, or other things in my world. Always being able to see two sides of something, always
Mhm.
being able to understand that, um, people can have very different points of views, but still come from the same space.
I don't know exactly when you knew that you were gay. I knew at a very young age, and for me, I mean, it was incredibly painful trying to reconcile that and to accept that part of me, especially having been raised in a Catholic environment in which, we were told that you were going to burn in hell for eternity, that you were anathema in the eyes of God. And yet I see now that that experience of feeling so different, that it forced me to ask some very profound existential questions at a very young age. Um, was that the case for you? And how does being gay affect that your vision about being human in the broader sense?
So yeah, I think I think I always knew too, in a way that, like, or what I call a knowing without knowing, right? You just know. And at first, of course, you don't even know what sexuality is, but you knew you were different,
Right.
right? And and from a very young age. For me, that sort of trauma or pain came a lot from my grandmother, who was my primary caretaker and also was very homophobic and also very xenophobic. So it was really kind of funny because I was doing even something that was too American. She also thought that was queer. So, so if I wasn't doing something queer, I was doing something too American, like joining the Cub Scouts, and that was queer, or eating oatmeal. Um, but I think I agree 100% with you. I think having those big questions at a young age, um, even though it might have been painful when not, just it makes you grow up faster. It makes you wiser, and it makes you um, more aware of the world. And I've thought about that a lot, and I think it's no wonder that a lot of LGBTQ plus people end up being somewhat very successful in whatever they choose in life, because I think they're just more determined, more focused, more they haven't taken life for granted or who they are for granted. And I think that always questioning oneself too, which is sometimes an unhealthy questioning, but sometimes a good questioning, how you keep on challenging yourself and do better and exceed. So I think all that, yeah, comes from childhood. With respect to my grandmother, in an odd way, I've come to understand that in some ways she was also influential in making me a writer through
Hmm.
her odd love, because she made me feel so self-conscious about acting like a sissy, that I became more of an observer of the world than a participant. And
Hmm.
so in some ways, that's what a writer should be doing most, is observing, right?
Hmm.
And listening and sort of translating human behavior,
Hmm.
human nature in one's head. Back then, it was just out of like pure survival. You didn't want to be called the F word, like, uh, but yeah, it made you an acute reader of people, and I think that's a great skill, and especially in writing, just to think about one's people's sort of psychology and your own. Yeah, I think that played an essential role, and then another part of that, uh, I think we talked about like that being bilingual and perhaps bicultural adds a dimension of seeing in the world, right? And I think this is a third. I mean, being a gay man in the world is also another kind of identity that you have to negotiate,
Yeah.
still have to negotiate.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
and so that's yet a third way of looking at it, right? Of looking at the world, and actually also the intersection of all those things. So like, the idea of like, well, yes, I'm a gay man, but I'm also a gay Cuban American man, which presents other kinds of complications and other kinds of mentions, right? And it's really more of my unique story rather than, the blanket gay man. And I hadn't actually made that connection till like my third book, where I thought, all the cultural identity stuff and all the searching for home was just had nothing to do with my sexuality, until I realized, well, that emptiness that you feel as a gay kid, that searching for another kind of home, another kind of community where
Hmm.
you hope to feel welcomed, accepted, be able to live your life without shame or fear, be supported. That's all kind of another kind of home, another kind of country, so to speak, that we have to find.
That's very profound and insightful. And if you're abuela, as if grandma's homophobia was instrumental in getting you to be such a profound observer of humanity and yourself. Then thank you. Gracias, abuela. Um, so, and speaking of which, that was one of the poems that I was hoping you would share with us today. Queer
Sure.
Theory, according to my grandmother. Do you have that handy?
Yeah, we got that one. So, like I was saying, yeah, she was homophobic and xenophobic. So I first wrote this poem. Well, I should say this poem is now in her voice. So it's what we call a persona poem. So it's an artful, it's a artistic liberty in some ways, but I had written it first in third person, or say speaking about her and the things she used to tell me. It was really interesting because it sounded like I was whining, right? Because what hurt when you're 7 years old does not necessarily hurt in the same way. Like if she were to say some of these things now to me, I'd be like, brush it off. Please, what are you, crazy? Like, so putting it in her voice lets her be, sort of lets you witness her personality and her love and also hurt that she was causing. But through this poem and several others and some essays, as I like to say, I learned through writing, because writing, as I say, makes you think, and thinking makes you write. But writing is a process of discovery. And I realized first, writing let me hate my grandmother, because I thought every grandmother was like this, right? So you show up to the therapist's office and go, no, grandmothers don't call their grandsons the F word every day. And then forgive her and finally love her, which is part of that was understanding that whatever the circumstances of my life, there's some, to use a cliche, some silver lining in some ways. And her odd expression of love was still in some ways love, right? In some ways she cared enough. I know this sounds weird, but enough. In some ways she cared enough to, as you'll see in this poem, to butch me up so I wouldn't suffer in the world. This is the world she knew, right? Like that being gay man was just lonely and full of pain and suffering.
That's right. The intention was good. The intention was to protect you and to prepare you.
Yeah, and as you'll see in the end here, she knew she wasn't going to change anything. She just wanted to change my appearance, not my behavior, not who I was. And that's a weird sort of very fine distinction. But all right, so remember, this is in the voice of my grandmother. Queer Theory, according to my grandmother. Never drink your soda with a straw. Men don't use straws. Milkshakes, maybe. Stop buying your mother's Avon catalog and the men's underwear and those Sears flyers. I've seen you. Stay out of her Tupperware parties and perfume bottles. Don't let her kiss you. She kisses you much too much. Avoid hugging men, but if you must, pat them real hard on the back, even if it's your father. Must you keep that cat? Don't pet him so much. Why don't you like dogs? Never play house, even if you're the husband, and quit hanging out with that Henry kid. He's too pale. And I don't care what you call them, those E.I. Joes of his are dolls. Don't draw rainbows or flowers or sunsets. I've seen you. Don't draw at all. No coloring books either. Put away your crayons, your Play-Doh, your Legos. Where are your Hot Wheels, your laser gun and handcuffs, those knives I gave you for Christmas? Never fly a kite or roller skate, but light all the firecrackers you want, kill all the lizards you can, cut up worms and feed them to that cat of yours. Don't sit Indian style with your legs crossed. You're no Indio. And stop click-clacking your sandals like some Tropicana chorus girl. And for God's sake, never, ever pee sitting down. I've seen you. Never take a bubble bath or wash your hair with shampoo. Shampoo is for women. So is conditioner, so is a mousse, so is hand lotion. Never file your nails or blow dry your hair. Go to the barber shop with your abuelo. You're not unisex, are you? Stay out of the kitchen. Los hombres don't cook, they eat. Eat anything you want, except deviled eggs, blow pops, croissants, bagels, maybe. Cucumber sandwiches and those little petite fours. Don't watch Bewitched or I Dream of Jeannie. Don't stare at the $6 million man. I've seen you. Never Dance Alone in Your Room, Donna Summer, Barry Manilow, The Captain, Antonio, Bette Midler, and all musicals forbidden. Posters of kittens, Star Wars, or the Eiffel Tower forbidden. Those fancy books on architecture and art, I threw them in the trash. No, you can't wear cologne or puka shells, and it better not catch you in clogs. If you grow a ponytail, I'll cut it off. Okay? What? No, you can't pierce your ear, left or right side. I don't care. You will not look like some goddamn queer. See me, even though I know you are one.
Mm.
So that sense of surveillance, right? I was talking about making me feel self-conscious of your behavior, of every move. But also the idea also that's, I think every culture has, machismo to some degree, right? And misogyny, but especially elevated in Latino culture and Latinx culture, the idea that it's about pretense or appearances versus anything else. So it's my grandmother, and this is a saying pretty much, I think, in a lot of the Cuban community, but es mejor serlo y no parecerlo que parecerlo y no serlo, right? Which harder to say in Spanish English, but so the idea is that it's more honorable to be gay and not act gay than it is to actually not be gay. So it's all about the appearance of manhood. So
yeah, it's very beautifully written, funny and poignant and sad also.
Right.
Because you see the conditioning, how it started, and the definition, the binary definition of gender, what boys do, what little girls do, what boys don't do, and it got me thinking about how really that's what's underneath it, the homophobia, because in Cuban Spanish at least, there's two words for queer, for gay. There's maricón, which is really bad, and you don't want to do that. But then there's bugarrón, which is more like the proactive role,
right.
which is not so bad.
Right.
So it's really the threat to the status quo is in their mind one of the men, or when a man willingly gives up the superior male status.
Right. Yeah, and that, by definition, right, machismo, there's a lot of irony in that, because really machista society starts becoming homoerotic. Right? But the idea is that women don't matter, right? So, which is a great irony in Latinx culture, because we have La Virgen of this and La Virgen of that, and we have, the mothers are revered, and don't you ever say anything bad about my sister, my mother, but they're also second-class citizens, right?
Yeah.
So the idea that anything feminine is to be frowned upon. So again, it's like appearances. You can be as gay as you want, as long as you don't act like a woman, because that's the bad part or whatnot. So there's a lot of interesting ironies of that. I mean, who writes wonderfully about that is Fernando Arenas, right? Which writes about you're not gay. You're only a gay man if you do only X sexual acts. If not, you're not really gay, man.
That's right.
So there's degrees of gayness, I guess.
That's right.
Depending
And
on
a lot of guys feel that way.
Yeah, still today, yeah.
Yeah. Talk a little bit about how your religious, spiritual upbringing influenced your writing, your poetry, your creativity.
Yeah, sure. My parents weren't. Of course, I went to Catholic school since kindergarten, all the way through 12th grade. My parents were, I guess, just stoic Catholics. They weren't, they're just, go to church. That's it, pretty much. They weren't very, even in my grandmother's case, right? Again, it wasn't about religious stuff, right? It was more again, about appearances, and being effeminate was the bigger crime. There was no going to hell, that kind of thing. And every family is different, but so luckily, my parents weren't like that, or my family wasn't like that. But it did influence me. I mean, I think dogma is complicated, and I think, you know, I don't know, so much religious instruction can be at such an early age, to me, wasn't that helpful. But as I look back, I think I appreciate the spiritual base that that kind of instruction gave me, the kind of moral compass it gave me. And I think in my own way, I think like many of us have explored different like, aspects of the divine and of spirituality, and I've read up on Buddhism and Zen, and of course, just psycho-spiritual stuff like, um, like Ken Wilber and Eckhart Tolle, and like, Jung, and all that. And I think I am allowed to explore those things because I have some kind of basis experience. But I think how it translated to me, I think I consider writing a religion and a spiritual act. It is as close to the divine as I can get. And in fact, I still have sort of, like a ritual. Like I light a candle, has to be 3 wicks. And I light a candle to my inner child, to my ancestors, my spirit ancestors, and also my literary ancestors,
Wow.
people in the pantheon of. So I believe in something greater than myself, so to speak. And I think I don't know exactly what that is, but I practice it, I think, mostly through my poetry, because there are some times where you are so connected. Not at the beginning of a poem, that's for sure, but there's a moment when you're writing a poem where something transpires, and it's just, you're tapped into something, because there's some wiser force that's writing this now. And it's you become sort of a conduit rather than, and not every poem. Some poems like you just work on forever and nothing happens. But I think that's how I do it. Also, I think, like I was saying earlier, connecting with nature is where I find God a lot. And I'm just curious about the question itself, right? About existence. This book that's coming out in October, it's called Homeland of My Body. And it's thinking about the question of home in a way I've never had before, almost abandoning the question of home, or that home as a physical, real thing, place, or set of people, but rather that it always exists in you, your body. Like you never gain a home or lose one. It's always part of your consciousness. And now that I'm 55, thinking about mortality and thinking about, what you take with you, not in the material sense, obviously, but and what you leave behind. And there's a phase of letting go of a lot of stuff. Even, the inherited trauma of my family and my community. I've done what I can, but like it's time to sort of cleanse. I don't know. So like I my writing in some ways, not only just writing it, but the pursuit of writing itself is in some ways a spiritual practice, because it's making me question my existence and my connection to something larger than myself.
I love how you express all of that, and I think you've already answered it, but I'm going to ask you directly. Do you think that creativity and spirituality come from the same place, share the same source?
I think so. I think I think that the act of creation is one of the most divine things we can engage in. I mean, I always I've thought about this here in little bits and pieces, but also even the way Genesis begins, right? Like the creation says, and God said, "Let there be light." The world began with word, right? Like, and I think also made in the likeness of God, right? I think if God is the Almighty Creator, right, to create is one of the sort of, again, most divine endeavors we can engage with, right? And create doesn't always have to mean like, writing poems. Create can mean a lot of things, right? I mean, even in my engineering, like people think, oh, engineering's not creative. it's totally creative. Like, I mean, we're making stuff that doesn't exist. And in some ways, sometimes when I'm designing something, I'm in the same space as I'm writing a poem. Um, Ironically, I ended up specializing in city planning, town development, and town redevelopment projects, which involved sometimes, working with a community for, sometimes years, trying to tease out of the community a consensus of what home means to them, which is exactly where my poetry intersected with. So, thinking about if you're going to redo this town, what's important, what do we keep, how does this change, affect you as a community? What memories do you have here? What things don't you want to let go of? What things, and in some ways, walking into a space that came out of your head, walking down, like, for example, redid all of Sunset Road in South Miami.
Huh.
So yeah, all that sort of like, that was all, jumbled out of my head. I mean, obviously with all this input from the community, and to walk into that space, I think it's even sometimes even more exciting than a poem, because you're like living inside this thing you created, or creating a bridge and signing a bridge and then driving over it. Like, so yeah, I think there's many ways in which we can express creativity, even as a parent. And I think it's what makes us feel most alive too, right? I think we need to create, whether that's cooking or, like, we're hardwired that way. And I've always made that connection to the divine. We feel
I love
alive
that.
and connected.
I love that you can access that same place, designing something in civil engineering wise, or creating a poem. You write that your passion is to demystify poetry. How does one do that, especially in a society that is so ADD, where most people don't read, period, much less read poetry? How do you do that?
Well, in part is the work I was talking about earlier, especially with the Academy of American Poets. I'm going to give you a little more backstory. So after the presidential inauguration, I just thought, people don't read poetry. I just thought I'd go home and walk the dog, like my life would go back to normal. And what happened was quite the contrary. I mean, tens of thousands of emails from people all across this country, from all walks of life, from all across the globe, expressing how connected they felt to the poem, that they finally felt part of America and represented, especially the LGBT community. That was so powerful to have that connection with them, and represent us in that space. And so I thought, what's the problem here? Because, but it was funny because a lot of people wouldn't say poem. They'd say, we really loved your speech.
Ah,
And I
interesting.
realized that a big problem is the way that poetry is taught. And not to point fingers at teachers or anything like that, because they're probably taught the same way. And it's kind of a systemic problem. We don't teach other arts in the ways that we teach poetry, because I think that in fact, there's a recognized phobia of poetry. It's called metrophobia. So
I didn't know that. What's it called again?
Metrophobia. And
That's
it comes
funny.
from the word meter. It sounds like fear of cities, but it comes from the word meter, from metered poetry. And the cause of it is, the trigger is when someone is asked to evaluate something without being given the proper parameters with which to evaluate it. And so it's like, that whole, you read a poem and, 6 seconds later, you're asked, what does the peach mean? Well, you haven't given me the context of the poem. You haven't given me, we don't even talk about the poet's life, or how, where we don't teach painting that way or music that way. And so that's one thing that I try to do is, work around that. And again, the Academy has very innovative ways of sort of getting educators off that same old, in ways that really connect. So that's one thing. Another thing is, me personally, again, being from a working class immigrant family, from a family that didn't even speak very much English, I've always tried to create poetry that's accessible and relatable. And in my book, accessibility and complexity are not antonyms. Something can be very complex,
Yeah.
but very accessible. And the poem meets you. I would strive for a poem that will meet you wherever you're at, whether you're a bus driver or a Harvard professor. And I think that's a lot of the hard work that a poet has to do, is distilling what's already complex into something that feels lucid. As Einstein said, right? Like any idiot can take something complex and make it more complex. I mean, E equals MC squared. There you go. Like, so
Yeah.
that's part of the work I feel I try to do personally, and also turn on people to those many poets that are writing in the same vein, without discarding the more complex stuff, because there's a place for that too. And just making people realize, like, people tend to think, you know, it's that poetry is one monolithic thing, like poetry with a capital P. Like, there's so many different kinds of poets and so many different kinds of poetry. And sometimes it's just a matter of finding the handful of poets that you love. And I always compare it to, like, if you read a novel you don't like, does that, or didn't understand, does that say, I hate all novels? If you see a movie you didn't like or didn't understand, you'd say, that's it, like, I'm never watching a movie again. I hate half the poems that I read. It's okay. But
That's funny.
and it's like getting back to that favorite poem project. If you look, you probably have a poem in your mind that did change your life and touch it. And the other thing is, like, poetry is a lot more like music. In fact, I think it should be taught more with music and with drama.
Interesting.
And not just in the English class, because its roots are all, its DNA is all spoken word. Is all, poetry comes from prayer, from chant, from war songs, from music, from really from some of the forms were at some point lyrical structures for songs, like the villanelle. So, and I think it comes to us, it's created like music in the way that the process of its creation, and it's also received like music. So, sometimes we don't necessarily understand the letter of a song, or a song to the letter, or what it means, but we feel it. And I always tell my students, if you feel one line in this poem, the poem has done its job. If you feel one line that said, and it made you think about something in your life, the poem has done its job. You may not understand the poem as a whole, but I compare it to music in that way too. Like, I don't know where the Hotel California is. And frankly, I don't care. And but there's something everybody, I mean, of course it's the music too that's catchy and whatnot. But when we can accept, like in music, I always tell my students that writing poetry is like music, in the sense that if we see a real human being struggling or with emotions or being elated about something, that when we see that kind of authenticity and honesty, we connect with that poem, because we're connecting with a human being and connect back to our lives, right? So, like movies, again, those movies aren't about our lives, right? But when they're done well, we reflect that they come back to make us reflect on our own life. And I think that's not taught enough in poetry class, right? In English class, it's more like, what did the poet mean? And what does the poem mean? It's like, no, how does the poem live in me is the first question. And from there, you can start extrapolating more objective critique or objective analysis of a poem. But if you're not feeling it, like, and a lot of times it's cut off, one of the greatest compliments that anybody can give me is, they say, Richard, that poem made me think about when my father or when my mother, when I was growing up, because then I know the poem has built a bridge, so to speak. It's connected. It's no longer about me. It's about now it lives in that person in a different way, in the same way that the other arts and, music, theater, dance, and movies and whatnot make us learn something about ourselves. And that's when we consider it a good movie, right? I mean, I'm not sure horror movies are in that category, but
it makes total sense. It makes total sense. I had never considered poetry as compared it in my mind to like prayer or chants, but you're absolutely right. It totally makes sense. And before I ask you to read one more poem to us, going back to your three wicks, and you mentioned one was to your literary ancestors. Who are some of them? Who are some of the poets who inspire you?
Sure. One of them is one of my greatest influences, Elizabeth Bishop, who is she died in 1975, Pulitzer Prize winner, but I really connect with her because she's very imagistic as I am. And my grandmother poems, that's a voice-driven poem. There's not a lot of imagery in there. But also she was effectively orphaned when she was 4 years old. Her father died and her mother was institutionalized with a nervous condition for the rest of her life. So I see in her same sort of a similar quest to find home and place and a belonging. And she lived in Brazil for 30 years. She lived in Key West. She lived up here in Maine. I think she was always, I see in her work, trying to find or create space, home through language. So that's one big influence. For me, of course, Whitman as well, for obvious reasons. I think I'm just asking the same questions that Whitman was asking, trying to formulate one's identity in relationship to this experiment still, this democracy or whatever we have these days, or whatever transition moment we're in right now. So still grappling with those questions from a very personal point of view, right? So there are others,
and also being colored by being gay.
Yep. Yeah, colored by immigrant, gay, and also feeling even culturally the other, right? I mean, doesn't feel that way in Miami, but
no, I meant Whitman too. I meant Whitman's writing as well.
Yeah, Whitman. Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Of course, they don't tell you that in school.
Right.
I wonder if that book will be banned in Florida next. If they start really uncovering all the bad books, like there's not going to be one book left. Maybe
that is funny and
red,
sad.
violets are blue. Like, there's not going to be one author left on the shelves if they dig deep enough.
That is so hard to believe that this is happening here in this country.
Yeah, it's very scary, but all the more reason to I mean, gives us some work to do, but gosh, not what I was planning in my lifetime per se.
Seriously, that's what our families got away from, was that totalitarian dictatorial way of living. I'm going to tell you how to think and how to be and what you can and you can't do.
And also snitching on each other, right? Like you just report somebody and there's no questions asked, you're guilty, so those are more recent. Mary Oliver, again, someone who's very centered in imagery, natural imagery, but also just somebody such a soul, right? Like such questioning, making those big questions in life. And I think some of my philosophers are in there too, not just poetry, right? Like Viktor Frankl and
yes. I want to be sensitive to your time as well. Do you have time to read us another poem?
Sure. I think I'll read, let me see. Well, since the topic of the conference or the theme or whatnot, this is a brand new poem that'll be out again in October. So I got really obsessed with, I don't even know where I heard it. It was probably NPR, of course. But when Moses is called to by the burning bush, he says, "Here I am," not "I am here." And so, as you know, in Judaism, a lot is paying attention to language. And so they've, of course, done studies on this and like how many times, and what is the semantics of saying "I am here" versus "here I am." "I am here" places the ego first, right? It says "I am here," right? Like, at least it's more, the semantics I think come through more in Hebrew. But to say "here I am" means that the one that is being called doesn't even know what they're being called for, but have already accepted, like there's a sense of just accepting that. So I don't know how to pronounce this word in Hebrew because it's brand new and I haven't practiced. So I hope our listeners will forgive me, but the verb or the phrase "here I am" is spelled Hineni. So Hineni. Okay, so
Mm.
help me out. If anybody listens, please send me an email how to pronounce that correctly. So I was thinking about what is my burning bush, what has called me all my life, and I went back to the beach and the scenery. And actually, now in Miami, I'm living in Surfside, which is where I got my first apartment. So there's all this weird sort of full circle serendipity going on. So it begins with an epigraph from Exodus 3:4. When the Lord saw that he had turned aside to look, God called to him out of the bush, Moses, Moses. He answered, here I am. God of these waves, gracious hands, anointing my feet. Here I am, again trudging along the shore with the sins of my greed for love, sins of my gluttony for homeland, sins of my wrath against myself. Here I am, asking again the ebb to wash my guilt back into the depths of forgiveness. God of these salt-laden breaths, these breezes, here I am, again breathing their balm into my body of hurt, that I might heal and exhale words to ease the world's aching. God of these devout seagulls peering into everyday eternity, inscribe anew across the pale blue of the sky's vellum, here I am, again reading the clouds' eclipses, following their drift into glimpses of a divinity I must divine in myself. God of the infinite possibilities of sand I was sculpted from, here I am, again infinitely a boy with bucket and shovel, still wanting to sculpt something almighty out of the sparkly grains of myself, something sacred that can't be washed away, something eternal. God of this sunset's tangerine eye, burning holy between eyelids of sky and sea. Here I am, called by your grace to ask once again, what would you have me do with the rest of this undone life of mine? Here I am.
Richard, that's beautiful.
I'm going through that emotion right now. It's also like music, and I mean, some of these, that's a brand new poem, but some poems that I've read like over 100 times, it's still like singing a song where you just go back into that emotional space and start uncovering what, just now to really uncover the poem starts speaking to me and understanding what even more of what I was there, but I never was conscious of, and it starts becoming something divine speaking back to me. But like, it's the power of saying, here I am. Like, it just became so obsessive.
And that's what I was going to ask you. Do you think because it touched me very deeply as you were reading it, but do you think part of what touches you still, even as the creator of it, is your own here I am being given expression?
Yeah, that sense of surrender, right? And
surrender, that's the word. That's the word I was thinking of.
And just being present. It's kind of, I think why it hit me so hard is because this poem was one of those poems I just kind of like, whoa. But one of my senses of prayer was always when I did live back in the beach, like early 30s, when I started writing poetry in that apartment, actually. I would just walk along the shore and I would just kind of like, here I am, like, what do you want me to do? Like, and the answer was always kind of like, whatever you want. Like, whatever, because it's just like, what good, what am I here to do for, not for myself, but for the world? And I remember that it wasn't like, oh, please give me this, or please give me that, or please, like, it was more like, here I am, I'm here to serve. Like, what is, and of course I get very far away from that space, mostly not that close to that space, but being back at that beach now, like, asking that question of the divine, of the everything, is a sense of surrender and of and a sense of selflessness, but not in the way of like the giving, like, because giving can be selfish too, but that make me. So one of my other favorite prayers is the prayer of Saint Francis of I don't know it by heart, but I have it right. Oh, here I have it. The one, that one. Lord, make me an instrument of thy peace.
Mhm.
So where like, the part there where it's like, you know, grant that I may not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understood, et cetera, et cetera. And I think it's also about letting the ego. I mean, this is, I've always interpreted some of the scriptures or prayers in that sense. For it is in the dying to ourselves that we are born to eternal life. And to me, that's the dying of the ego, right? When you let go of
Yes.
your desire and whatnot, and just put your hands in something larger than kind of what happened in the inauguration. Like I was saying, it kind of felt that way. Like
Yeah.
this is not, I'm in service of something far bigger. This moment is far bigger than me or anything I could have plotted. But
Mm.
yeah, I think so I say this prayer every time before I go to before I give a performance, a reading.
Mm.
I say the prayer of St. Francis quietly to myself. I have it in my jacket, my reading book here.
Mm.
And then I also say the line from RuPaul's Drag Race, which is when they have to lip sync for their life, and she says, "And don't F it up." so like that's all fine and dandy, you're gonna be like give yourself to surrender, but you're still a professional, so don't mess it up.
Yeah, that's beautiful, Richard. That's
Like, you're still on.
very, very moving. And I was thinking as you were speaking that there's a lot. I think some part of the reason that we struggle with the word surrender is because it's misunderstood, and it has that feeling of throwing in the towel or
Yeah,
giving up. Whereas I was thinking in Spanish, entregarse
yeah,
means that you're giving yourself away. So
yeah,
it's more like you're giving that individual separate ego identity away in service to something greater.
yeah. That's a great point. Yeah, it comes from the word enter, right? Versus entregar, right? To become part of something rather than to give up something in some weird way. You're giving into something larger, becoming part of something.
Yes, beautiful, Richard. I could speak with you for hours and look forward to seeing you soon. And anyway, thank you
Sure, my
for
pleasure.
sharing your brilliance and your time and your authentic raw beauty with us.
Thank you.
Much appreciated.
Thank you for that opportunity and for everything you're putting on to um, make the world a better place.
Mm.
See you.
See your true face. A new day for the human race after centuries of shame. Remember us, our victories, examples of a higher being, a destiny, one in the same. Shine a light on